Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Well, good evening. My name is Tony Szalkiewicz. I'm referred to as the Messenger, trying to bring you some of the current events in the Catholic Church and what's happening around the world. My co-host is Bryan Mercier. How you doing, Bryan?
I'm doing good, Tony.
Good. So what we're doing today's this is going to be the final show for a while because Bryan and myself are getting busy with other type of work. So we're going to call this a pause for the time being until we come on. We've been on actually over a year now. So and Bryan's been on board since October, I think Sebastian said, right?
Yes, yeah.
That's amazing. See how time flies. Wow.
It really does.
So tonight we discussed, we're going to be talking a little bit, Bryan. You're going to talk about the Crusades, right?
I am. And Galileo and some other topics perhaps if we have time.
Yeah. Well, why don't we get into it then?
Great. Let's. Because I find a lot of people don't know church history. And it's very easy for people to look at Catholics, and say, oh, well, look at the Catholic Church. You guys had the Inquisition. You had the Crusades. You had all of this stuff. And they basically just label all of these charges against the Catholic Church, but they themselves actually don't understand any of them. I think this could probably be summed up in a conversation that I had with Mormons. I had Mormons at my house for about a year. And after they couldn't answer any of my objections anymore, they decided to just attack the Catholic Church. And they ended up saying that, oh, well, look at the Catholic Church. You guys had 3 popes at one time. You guys had the Inquisition. You guys had the Crusades. And you had the witch. I was like, whoa, okay. I get it. You guys have some objections to the Catholic faith, but why don't we talk about one at a time? And I said, which one do you want to talk? Which one would you like to focus on? And they thought about it for a second, and they said, the Crusades. I said, great. What year did the Crusades happen?
Yeah.
Silence. They just looked at each other, kind of like a deer in the headlights. And I said, they shrugged their shoulders and said, we don't know. What was the name of the Pope at the time? Silence. They said, we don't know. I said, what was the historical backdrop and circumstances that were happening at the time to cause the Crusades?
Right,
silence.
Right.
So all the questions I asked them, they had no clue. And I said, wow, listen, Mormons, I said, you guys hate something so much that you actually know nothing about.
Exactly.
So let me inform you of what really happened. I was like, in order to know about the Crusades, which happened around 1095 AD, you have to back up about 400 or more years to a man named Muhammad. And Muhammad was a man who ended up leading armies onto the battlefield. I mean, they didn't like his new doctrine, and so they kicked him out of the town he was in, and he fled to a new town called Medina. And once he got to Medina, he united all the clans there. He raised an army, and he ended up going back and sacking Mecca, the town that kicked him out in the first place. And he would lead armies onto the battlefield until the day he died. And by the time he died, he had conquered all of what we know today as the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East. Now, after Muhammad died, over the next 100 years, the wars of Islam just intensified. And they conquered everything from 607 AD to 707 AD. They conquered everything from Afghanistan to North Africa. And then they started pushing into Europe and into a lot of islands as well. Now, around that time, around 707, 727, somewhere around there, they actually started to expand their empires anymore. And by this time, they had conquered the Roman Empire, they had conquered the Persian Empire, and they had conquered 3/4 of the Byzantine Empire. There were only 3 major empires on earth, and they had conquered 2.5 of them. And it was at this time that a man named Commodore Alexius I, he called the Pope for help. Now notice, this is the same Orthodox Church that kind of broke away from the Catholic Church 50 years earlier, and now out of desperation is calling on the Pope for help. And said, what? We'll pray about it. And so he prayed about it for a long period of time, and eventually he wrote a letter to all of Christendom and said, we need to help our brothers in the East. And since so many Catholics have been killed on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, we're going to try and take back the Holy Land too and create a safe passage there for Christians. So what I told the Mormons is if you had actually read the letter of the Pope, which we still have today, you would know that the Crusades were started as wars of self-defense to help the Eastern Christians and to help Christians who were being massacred on the way to the Holy Land. I said that's why the Crusades were started. They were wars of self-defense. And the Mormons just sat there completely stunned, and they had nothing to say. They're like, "Oh, we never really knew that before."
They didn't know that? I mean, what were they thinking?
Most people don't know that. Most people have no idea. The majority of people think the Crusades were started because, the Catholic Church was this power-hungry church who persecuted people who disagreed with them, who, they picked on Islam because Islam wasn't Catholic, or other people, the East had a lot of riches and the Catholic Church wanted the riches, so they started these wars to get rich. I mean, there's a lot of common historical myths out there, but the majority, I'd say 90% of the people, have no idea, including the textbooks in school, by the way, have no idea why the Crusades were started.
Yeah, it's like, and I recall that shortly after Muhammad's death is when Islam struck out against the Christian, conquering Palestine, Syria, and Egypt. And isn't that funny? Because they're still doing it. They're still in that region fighting and fighting and fighting.
Well, after the Crusades, the Crusades were only partially successful. The Islam continued to grow in power. They continued to expand their military and their navy, which was like second to none in the world. And they just had this awesome force by which hardly anyone could conquer until about the 1600s when they finally kind of settled them down. And it went on until probably World War II. Most people don't realize that the Islamic countries sided with Hitler and the other side. And so when we won, France and England and different countries kind of got together and said, we need to do something about these countries. Let's split them up. France will take these countries and we'll make them part of you. England will watch over these countries and keep them in check. And so that's kind of when Muslims started to get more peaceful, was when they were all kept in check, and a lot of things started to change. Of course, the terrorists today think they're part of the original Islam that's trying to conquer the world for Allah, whereas they say that the peaceful Muslims are the fakes, are the ones who kind of sold the lukewarm Muslims who just don't live their faith anymore. So that's kind of the state of Islam today, and that's kind of where the Crusades were at. There were definitely some abuses in the Crusades, there's no doubt, because there were a lot of different kings and kingdoms and peoples from slaves all the way up to nobles involved, and it was a messy affair, so there were definitely some abuses, but the original cause of the Crusades was a good one.
Well, anytime there's war, though, Brian, there's always abuses.
Right.
Because of the nature of it and the nature of the military. I served in the military, and it's not a good thing to be broken, to know that you become a professional killer, and that's what they have to do to you. So that's probably the worst stripping of any humanity, is to break you that way. And so that to the point that whatever's in front of you, it doesn't matter, because basically you're a walking dead man. Because you don't suspect you're going to come out of it. You have no idea you're going to get out of it. So you bear it and say, if I can make it, I make it. If I don't, I don't. That's just the way it is. So, but so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, did
a lot of
the Romans asked for help, didn't they? How are the Romans connected with that?
Well, the problem was, part of the problem with this whole thing, which never would have happened if Rome and Persia hadn't been at war. They had been at war for so long that each one was trying to take out the other one, and they ended up, in a sense, destroying each other. I mean, they both made each other so weak that neither could attack the other. I mean, they basically decimated each other's armies, and it was at that exact time when both were completely weak that Islam just rose to power and had this huge army and basically just rode over them as if they weren't there.
That was the Byzantine Empire at the time, I think it was, referred to?
The Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, and then the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah,
the Byzantine Empire held out for a really long time, but eventually they got conquered hundreds of years later.
Right. Wow.
Yeah, very interesting. And in fact, there's a lot of misconceptions that surround the Crusades. For example, a lot of people say, yeah, but, the Catholic Church just killed everybody. I mean, in the First Crusade, they even killed Jews. They just slaughtered Jews like it was their job or something. And what they don't realize is that there was a guy named Peter the Hermit and another guy named Waldo, and they actually broke away from the Crusades and made their own crusade against what the Pope said to do. They went down the Rhine and attacked Jews. And to prove that the Catholic Church wasn't against Jews, when the bishop of the towns heard about it, they actually opened the churches and opened their houses, and they actually hid the Jews from these kind of renegade Catholics who broke away. And again, the Pope had commanded, nothing of the sort to happen. So it was an abuse, not of the Catholic Church, but of people who just kind of made the Catholic Church look bad. But these are kind of a lot of the things that are floating around, a lot of the misconceptions and myths that we have that are repeated endlessly. Yeah.
And you always get that's another thing of war. You always get the renegades that always want to do the next step that are very disobedient. Isn't that true with the break above all the churches anyways,
Absolutely.
That's what it is, because of disobedience, not wanting to follow the Pope and stuff. Now, you're talking about Pope Urban II,
correct?
Called upon the Knights of Christendom, around 1095, I think, so around 1100.
Yes.
For the Council of Clermont, right?
Yep.
Wow. So that's good. That's good information for people to really know, what really happened there.
Yeah, and go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, so the Muslims set out. I'm just curious now, did they destroy their own like what's happening today?
I'm sorry, what?
I'm wondering if the Muslims, when they set out to conquer these, the 2/3 of all the lands, did they destroy their own in the same process? So they weren't really extremists, they were just typical Muslims following Muhammad.
Originally, in the old days, most of the lands were Christians because Christians had preached for over 600 years and had converted a lot of the nations, which all became Christians. So most of the lands they took were Christians, and most of the people who died were Christian. But a lot they allowed, depending on the Muslims, they allowed people to live too. But they had to live as second-class citizens within the Muslim countries, which had a lot of fines they had to pay, had a lot of rules they had to follow, including they had to pay the jizya tax. They had to not pray in public. They couldn't restore or rebuild any churches. They couldn't build any churches publicly after the ones that were already built. And they had to stand in the presence of Muslims. So, for example, there were just a lot of rules that they had to follow because they were treated as second- and third-class citizens. Sometimes they were abused. Sometimes they were killed. Sometimes Muslims just wiped out Christian churches, and sometimes they conquered them and made them into Muslim mosques. And so nowadays, though, the Muslims do conquer some Muslims too. I mean, I think they said over 95% of all wars have been by Muslims against Muslims and against non-Muslims. So that's kind of a big statistic.
That is. The other thing you made reference earlier, the misconception that the Crusades went out to gain money, but a lot of the Crusaders were very wealthy individuals to begin with. And they owned land, from what I understand, in England and elsewhere. So they weren't going after money. They had money.
Yeah, well, it depends.
As an act of love for God.
A lot of the Crusades were like a ragtag team, a ragtag army. You had people from farmers carrying pitchforks, and then you had really more bigger armies that were led by nobles and kings. Now, when you get up to the kings and nobles, they were incredibly rich. But to go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem and to march for 2 years is extremely expensive. So they had to actually sell a lot of their lands. They had to sell their houses in a lot of cases. And in fact, a lot of especially the good Catholic kings, they actually funded up to 6 or 7 crusaders at a time who couldn't afford to go. And so they would sell their kingdoms half the time, a lot of their lands, a lot of their buildings, and they would be left with hardly anything. And of course, there weren't all these crazy riches. Most of the people over there didn't get rich. And in fact, after they conquered Jerusalem and they came back, a lot of them came back to almost nothing and had to live off the charity of Christians. So,
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah,
it is. So what you said is true.
Yeah, it didn't. Now, Pope Innocent followed Pope Urban, right? The second.
Correct. Oh, yes.
So, and he kept the, he basically supported the Crusaders, right? I believe.
Well, all Christians pretty much supported the Crusaders at this time. I mean, because as soon as they came, this is proof that they didn't want to go over there and get rich. Because as soon as they went over there and conquered Jerusalem, they came home.
Yeah.
Nobody thought about a strategy saying, hey, we might actually need to defend this. Hey, the Muslims actually might come back. What should we do? And so they actually came home. They fulfilled their duties, and the Muslims did raise a huge army and tried to come back, and so they needed to create a second crusade in order to do that, and then a third crusade. I mean, all of these reasons kept coming up for all of these crusades to be called, and in the end, the popes continued to preach it, and people like a lot of the big saints started to preach it, and it was actually it was a good thing for a while. A lot of them went drastically wrong, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of sounds like history repeating itself over the past few years, and particularly the past 8 years, as we went overseas and defended Afghanistan and in Iran, and not Iran, Iraq, and all these other things, and then we pulled out, and what happened after the same thing.
Right.
I don't
know.
It's
It's
like
very
pulling a plug out of a tub, yeah. You gain all that, then you walk away. What do you think's going to happen? I mean, I think what made it worse with the previous president was that he would announce what he was going to do.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
What? I can, to me that's treason. It really is. It's like beyond. I don't know.
And now you have ISIS, which is even more extreme than the other radical Muslim groups who are already pretty extreme and claim to hold to the actual teachings of Islam. And if you read the writings of these quote-unquote extremists, they quote the Bible. They quote the Quran all the time. They quote the Hadith, which are the tradition of the Muslims, which are as authoritative or almost as authoritative as the Quran itself. And one of the 5 pillars, well, there's 5 pillars in it, but there's a 6th unspoken pillar, which is often talked about in the Hadiths, which is known as jihad, which everyone knows is the holy war. Now, a lot of Muslims today say, well, that's just spiritual holy war. We're supposed to fight against sin. We're supposed to make ourselves better. And, of course, these Muslims are saying, that's nonsense. What do you think we've done for 1,600 years? It wasn't a spiritual war. It was to kill the infidel. But quite frankly, I like the peaceful Muslims, and I like the fact that they're making it a spiritual jihad, and I think that's a good thing. But I think there's such a split in the religion of Islam. There's so many radical terrorist groups. In fact, some scholars think that there could be up to 40 or 50% of Islam that's actually radical and in these kind of more violent Islamic groups.
Mm. Yeah, sadly, I kind of believe the same thing, because only for the sake that they don't speak out, the good ones. They just don't. You don't hear from them. So what does that say? Silence is. It's the old cliche that says, when good people do nothing, evil survives.
True.
True. Thank God for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He
I think he's doing pretty
military,
well.
Yeah, he lets the military do what the military is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the results,
Yeah.
Not that I am in favor of it, of course. I'm not. We're not supposed to be in favor of that, but there is just wars,
Yeah. And as you said before, as you alluded to, there were a lot of people in the Crusades who didn't listen to the Pope, who didn't listen to the Church, who had their own ideas of what they wanted to do. And so they kind of split away from the Crusades sometimes, or led the Crusader armies to do bad things sometimes. And there was a lot of dissension, within the Crusader armies. It wasn't just, the Muslims were very organized. They were very fortified. They were very, well done. But the Crusades were not. They were just a ragtag bunch of a ton of different people. And so that's why it was easy for some abuses to creep in like that.
Yeah.
The biggest, one of the big things happened, as you know, just bad things happen in war. So if you can imagine 2 years of marching to Jerusalem, 2 years of not being able to sleep at night for fear that you're going to be ambushed and killed, 2 years of running low on food and water, and you finally get to Jerusalem, fighting Muslims and taking over strongholds the whole way. And 2 years later, you finally make it to Jerusalem, and the Muslims have basically burned all the crops in the area. There's nowhere to get food. There's nowhere to get water. You're starving. People want to go home. They don't think it can be done. And a long story short, a couple really hardcore Christians come in, and they actually really kind of rally the Christians against all hope. And miraculously, and it was such a miracle, a lot of miracles actually happened, but they miraculously conquered Jerusalem, in which they were far, far outmanned and far outnumbered and far outmatched. And they conquered Jerusalem. And when they finally busted down the doors of the Jerusalem gates, 2 years of just being killed and starved and shot and just abused in every way. I think just so many people, as happens at war, they just snapped. And the Christians, a lot of the Christians, not a lot of the good ones, but a lot of the ragtag ones went in there and just killed everything in sight. They didn't really distinguish between man, woman, and child. A lot of abuses happened, which the Crusaders get a lot of flack for today. And the generals, they tried to stop them, but they just couldn't stop their men. Once their men got that adrenaline going, they just went in and just slaughtered everything. And they even ransacked churches and did stuff that is not even becoming to Christians and doesn't even make sense. You actually wonder how Christian they actually were. But nowadays you hear a lot of myths and misconceptions that, the Crusaders were evil. They killed every man, woman, and child, which of course isn't true. The blood was running up. The blood was so high, it was running up to your knees. Like, they just have some just ludicrous accusations. But long story short, there were a lot of abuses, when they took over Jerusalem. Sad things definitely happened, which is a bad mark on Christianity. And that's one of the things Pope John Paul II, I believe, apologized for around the year 2000, around the Jubilee. He didn't apologize for the Crusades because there's nothing to apologize for, but he apologized for some of the abuses that happened in the Crusades.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, and it's just the nature of war itself is is extremely difficult to describe. What I hear is, first of all, I was dumbfounded about a year ago when I heard what percentage of even the U.S. What percentage of the total population actually served in the military?
Mm.
It's about 1%.
Wow.
1%. Now, when you think of that, and then you see what's going on with the kneeling, the flag burning, and stuff like that, if it wasn't for the 1%, they would not have any rights. Nobody would have any rights.
Right.
As a matter of fact, Hitler would have been walking the streets, and all Christians would have been massacred, and all Jews would have been massacred, because that's what he was setting out to do.
Right.
And he came very, very close to doing it too, by the way, which people don't realize. Very close. And if it wasn't for the interception of God himself, stopping all that, and even saving Jerusalem, I mean, that's God's people, period. It ain't going to happen. I mean, that nation survives because God says, these are my people, period. That's the end of it. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Well,
and when it
does,
right. he's going to intercede, and it's just going to. Well, we don't want to go there, I guess.
Well, you're right in the fact that Islam, a couple times in history, almost took over the whole world. They came very close sometimes, and in fact, at one point, there was really nothing the Christians or anyone else could do to stop them. But as is the case with Islam, there's always a lot of infighting among the clans and among the different sects of Islam, such as the Sunnis and the Shiites and such. And when the Christians were at their weakest, this huge war broke out within Islam, and they just kind of killed each other in a sense, to a point where the Christians actually could come in and do real damage to them. And if that wasn't a divine intervention, there's no way, as I understand it from history, that something really could have been done about it. And that's happened a couple of times in history, a lot of close calls in a sense. And, in the fact if the Crusades hadn't been started, who knows? Maybe we'd all be speaking Arabic today and reading the Quran.
Well, I know, and that's what I say to people. I says, I've come, even today, Brian, history's repeating itself from ancient times. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to Jonathan Cahn, who's been blessed with and graced with making the similarities from ancient past to what's currently happening. And he describes it, word for word. Some of the politicians who are speaking today are quoting ancient writings, and they don't even know they're doing it. And even the timing, even the positions and who's at power, all that's described from the past, and it's just we're in a repeating mode. It's being repeated, the history from ancient. So I just can't see why Muslims would turn on their own, and they don't. I can't see anybody slaughtering the innocent. I just, I understand how it could happen when the innocent is used for, like, carrying a bomb or something like that,
Right.
Because that has happened. We've seen that happen.
Exactly.
But just to go in and just, I don't know, to slaughter for the sake of slaughtering, that doesn't sit well with me, So go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that was like they didn't have a second crusade too that went back.
Yes, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth. I think depending on your number them, some say there were 7 crusades, some say there were 9, some say there were up to 14, depending on what you consider a crusade. But generally, most people consider there were about 7 to 9 crusades.
How about this one? How about the U.S. is protecting Jerusalem right now? That's another crusade.
Yeah. You might be interested.
That is.
Do you remember the 1967, I think it was the I can't remember. I think it was a 3-day war or a 6-day war. I think it was the 3-day war back in 1967. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
There were 5 Muslim countries that decided to invade Israel, and they were going to try and conquer Israel, but Israel took them out in like 3 days, because they have a superior military. But even as recent as 1967, you still see the Muslim aggression against Israel and against other people.
Yeah, I think they don't get it. I don't think they fully realize that they're the chosen people. They don't get that. They just don't get it. And what kind of boggles my mind, too, is they've got a great devotion to the Blessed Mother, Well,
they definitely honor her, for sure.
Yeah, so how do you honor one and negate the idea of Jesus himself?
Well, they love Jesus, too. They just think he's different than we think of him. They consider him a prophet. Yeah. They consider him a prophet. They consider him a respected person in Islam, but they go by the Quran, not the Bible. And the Bible says that Allah, fight in the cause of Allah, kill the infidel, that sort of thing. In fact, I think one scholar said that Islam is the only system in the world that has an organized system of warfare, where it's actually organized for that. And it's very, very interesting. There's countless verses in the Quran that talk about warfare and killing the people of the book, which are Christians and Jews. And, that's why radical Muslims don't think they're radical, because they think they're just being Muslims. We consider them radical because it's different for us today, but it's also because people don't understand the history of Islam. And in fact, the Crusades, as we call them today, most Muslims didn't care about the Crusades. Most Muslims just thought they were another war. It was a drop in the bucket. No one talked about those for hundreds of years until polemicists came out and started recreating this history that never really happened, this revisionist history.
Right.
But
Wow.
the last crusade, the Fourth Crusade, was the big one that most people bring up, because that's probably the biggest mark on Christianity, black mark, because we had probably the biggest army we ever had, and we were going to take back the Islamic lands and Jerusalem, and we probably would have succeeded. But we didn't want to walk for 2 years again. So we decided to hire a navy, and big problems with the Byzantine Empire. But long story short, the Byzantine Empire said they would make us a navy, and then when push came to shove, and we put somebody back on the throne in the Byzantine Empire, as we promised to do, he didn't uphold his end of the bargain, and he ended up destroying all the ships that the Christians had just paid so much money for and couldn't even afford in the first place. Now they're stranded in the Byzantine Empire with no food, with no water, with no way to get to Jerusalem, and you have tens of thousands of soldiers who are mad as heck, and they don't know what to do. So against the Pope's orders, the Pope had ordered them not to even go near Byzantine and to leave the Greeks alone. They actually turned their entire army toward the Byzantine Empire and just sacked the city like nobody has ever seen before. They just destroyed it, and they burned it, and they killed so many people, even innocent people. Just the rage. See, there's been so much rage between Christianity and Byzantines for so long, because the Byzantines had actually sacked Christians in 1187 in the exact same way. They sacked this endless Christian lands, and they killed priests, they killed women, they killed children. Theirs was actually much worse than ours, but nobody remembers that, and nobody talks about it because it's not a huge crusade. So when it happened in the Fourth Crusade, I mean, the Eastern Orthodox and the Eastern Christians have never, probably more the Eastern Orthodox, but they've never forgiven us since. That's actually one of the biggest things that prevents the Orthodox from reuniting with the Catholic Church. They can't let go of the Fourth Crusade. They can't forget it, and they overlook all the stuff that they did to us and all the times they slit our throats in the Crusades. Even though we were helping them, they got many of us killed. They overlooked all that, and they just said, look what you guys did. Why would we ever join your church? And the Pope kind of made it worse by saying, well, basically he condemned the Crusades, of course, and he excommunicated a lot of the Crusaders. But he said, since it's conquered, we might as well take it over. And he kind of made a really dumb decision to, kind of take advantage of the situation. And I don't know, the Eastern Christians never really forgave us for that, and that's a huge source of conflict even to today. And that's another thing, by the way, that Pope John Paul II has apologized for, again, not for the Crusades, but for the abuses during the Crusades.
Yeah, that was Pope Innocent III, I think, right?
I'm not positive, but I think so.
Yeah, I think he excommunicated the entire crusade.
Yes,
strongly denouncing the Crusaders, I believe.
Exactly. Precisely. But that's something that they'd see what the Catholic Church did. The Catholic Church was, but that's what I point out is like the Catholic Church said not to do that. The Pope said not to do that. Don't mistake the abuse for the Church, because that's not what the Church wanted.
And you're right about John Paul II. Unable to really open it up, he tried to bring the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church together. I think they're closer because he did intercede to some degree. So I mean that's yet to remain. I don't see the fighting between the Christians though. I don't know. Did they ever fight themselves? I don't recall it. They had disagreements.
Yeah, not in the same way that I know of. I mean, unless you're talking about like the 30 Years' War and Protestants and Catholics, but that might be a little bit different rather than Catholics killing Catholics. Yeah,
exactly. Not like Muslims doing Muslims, which we currently have,
Right,
going
exactly.
to just butchering people. Wow.
Right. Yep. So there's a short history of the Crusades for you and for our listeners.
Well, that's very interesting. So now today, we're doing the same thing. We're still fighting the Muslims, not all of them, but the select few. And I just heard, I think it was on the TV today in Pakistan that the what group is in the Taliban is increasing in force again.
Yeah.
So I don't know where it's going to lead.
Yeah, I don't either. But I do know, that ISIS is definitely one of the more radical extreme, and they could be considered radical, Tony. They definitely are far more savage than most Muslims have been through history. Now, there's been some really savage Muslims, especially the Seljuk Turks and such. But these people, I mean, decapitating all the people's heads and just the sick things that they do is, even for Islam, is really kind of extreme.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Not even the Taliban would go that far.
I know. It kind of reminds me of what in a way of what they're thinking. The Christians aren't going to rise up. But, the president of Mexico, I think back in 1930, made a mistake by saying, we're going to slaughter the Christians because they're hindering the governments for doing what they wanted to do. So they went out and started butchering them because they felt, hey, the Christians aren't going to do nothing. They'll forgive us, blah, blah, blah. And they were wrong. The Christians did rise up, and they did stop the abuse. It went on for a long time. The only thing is that the Christians did fall a little bit short because they finally came to peace with the president. They didn't unseat him, though. And I think at the end, when they finally stopped the war, 7,000 of the leaders were massacred. So you say to yourself, why didn't you, if you're going to do the whole thing, go the whole way?
Right.
Go the whole way. There's no answer to war, though. War's sick.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's no winners. Everybody loses. Everybody loses. Who are the winners?
And it's not just wars, it's extremism too, like blowing up buildings, blowing up marathons, blowing up people. It's just killing yourself in the name of that cause. It's really extreme.
Yeah. And you see a lot of that, even today, if you really think about the current history and what we're going through in these few years, the number of suicides, the abortions that are occurring, and all the other radical things that are so-called legal. I heard a woman on TV last night saying at 5 weeks or something, the baby can sense invasion because of the way they videotape, the baby moving when they try to tear the baby out of them. They have it actually. I saw a film on it. It's disgusting.
What was it? The silent scream?
It could have been. It could have been the silent
scream. Yeah, it's
scream.
really powerful.
It was pretty powerful. Right.
I'm reading a book right now called Unplanned by Abby Johnson. Abby Johnson actually was the director of a Planned Parenthood clinic for 8 years, and she loved her job. And
wasn't she the one out in California, right?
No, Texas. She was a champion of the pro-life.
Oh, she's in Texas? Okay, yeah. I remember the name, yeah.
And she actually converted to Christianity after she saw an abortion in an ultrasound. Now, normally they don't do that, but in late-term abortions, there's much more chance of hurting the woman and having damage. And so one particular doctor likes to use an ultrasound so he could see what he's doing and make sure that he doesn't harm the woman as much as possible. And so he asked, this never happened, but they asked Abby to come down, even though she was the director and didn't do this sort of thing, but since they didn't have anyone else, they asked her just to hold the ultrasound equipment, the screen, still, so he could see what he's doing. And in doing so, once he stuck the instrument in, it started poking at the baby and trying to get it in the right place. The baby started squirming all over the place. And she said it almost looked like the baby was trying to move away from, the scissors and really looked like it was in pain. And then all of a sudden they started pulling it apart, and then it sucked it out and crushed the spine. Long story short, it scarred her for life. She had nightmares about it. She was preaching that it was just a fetus, that it was just, tissue, a clump of cells, like all of this stuff that we hear. And now she's seeing it was a baby, and she remembers seeing the ultrasound of her own baby at that same exact week, or basically the same age, along. Yeah. And she put 2 and 2 together and said, how could I be so blind? And just her story is just absolutely amazing. And I'm in the story right now where she ran out of Planned Parenthood because they told her that their budget is low, and so she increased the number of abortions by a lot. And the whole talking point of Planned Parenthood is that they want to decrease the number of abortions, but in fact it's how they make the most money. And so when she was told to keep increasing abortions, and she kept seeing what was happening, she couldn't take it anymore, and she cracked, and she ended up running out of the door crying her eyes out. And she ran across the street to the pro-life coalition, who took her in and listened to her cry for an hour. And she had a box of tissues all over the floor. She was a mess. Her makeup was everywhere, but she never went back, and she gave it up because she realized that she was responsible for taking so many lives. And in a sense, we condemn Hitler for killing 10 million Jews and Gypsies and Catholics, but we've killed more people than he's ever killed through abortion.
That's true. That's
by
true.
Far,
and
by a lot.
I remember. Yeah, I know. And you know what? And they say it's legal. It's not legal in God's eyes. I don't know. People got to get off it. It is not legal in God's eyes. And you're gonna. What do you think? When you die, you're gonna stand before a president or your doctor who's got no. You're gonna have to explain to Jesus why you did that.
That's right.
Why did you do that?
When a woman says when it's my body, my choice, that's the common phrase. Well, not really. It's not your body. First of all, it's the baby's body. If it was your body, you would be the one who dies. but you're not.
Exactly.
The baby does. And it's not your body because it's God's body that he gave to you on loan for a short amount of time. And you're going to have to answer to him for how you treated that body. And when it's time basically to give it back to him, you're going to have to answer for what you did.
Not only that, here's the other part of it. And I recall a few years ago, remember that girl that was, she was kind of in a coma for a number of years in Florida, and her husband wanted to pull the plugs.
Yeah, yep. And
I remember having a discussion with some people. Oh, yeah, he should pull the plug. He should do that. He should do this or that. And I said, I looked at him and I said, you know what? I said, do you realize you're going to be held accountable for that thinking? I'll tell you what. Once you go to Florida, I'll buy you a ticket to go to Florida. I want you to pull the plug. And there's total silence.
Mm.
Oh, what do you mean? I says, because you're thinking when they pull the plug, you're pulling the plug for them. And you're going to be held accountable for that.
Right.
Our thinking is warped. We got to acknowledge that we have original sin. So our thinking is not pure. It's not like the Blessed Mother or Jesus' thinking. It's like what Jesus says. He says, "Oh, don't you know who I am? My Father is who I am." Because the whole thing of purity, pure nature, we can't even comprehend that. The Blessed Mother could, because she's born without original sin. So what is pure? I think the purest thing you think of is how do you love your child or your children? Equally or unequally?
Hmm.
That's what purity is. They have different characteristics. One might be really good, the other might be really bad. But are they condemnable? Can you condemn them?
Mm.
You see what I mean? So you search for the truth, which is Pontius Pilate. What is truth? And of course, it's standing in front of them. God, what else could you have? I am truth. And what are you going to do? You got to let me turn over to fulfill Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when I heard one thing, where's Pontius Pilate? And one of the saints along the way I read about, they said he's in purgatory, the closest to hell. And the reason why is because if we recall from the movies and stuff, he knew that he was warned by his parents, according to the story, not to persecute this holy man, not to do it. And what did he do? He washed his hands clean of it. Mm. The act of washing his hands, it was basically, forgive me, Lord, I have to do this, that type of thing. But that little bit is putting him the closest to hell to the end of time. But you know what? To the end of time. I don't know how long that is. I don't want to be there, though. I know that. I pray never get even close to that.
Yeah, whose time? Ours or God's, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I know. I was just talking to somebody yesterday about that. I said, do you realize how short life really is? It really is short. I mean, look you're halfway through your life, basically, right? You're fast approaching over the hill.
Right.
I know.
And,
I could never understand that saying over the hill, because I turned 50, and I say, what do you mean over the hill? 51? What do you mean over the hill? At 52, I woke up one day, and every bone in my body ached. I says, now I understand what over the hill means. And the pain
so you went over
stayed
at 52.
there. 52, yeah. And I thank God for the 52 years I had with nothing,
Right. Well, my bones and body have ached since I was like 21, so I'll be used to it by the time I'm 50.
There you go. The greatest thing we can have, Brian, is friendships. That's. I said to my grandchildren, faith. That's right. And I said to them, I says, remember one thing: the person who attacks you the most is a person that needs the most love.
That's right.
And you have to defend. I said, like my grandson says, Donna, you're going to be very, very. You're going to be a big boy. He's a great swimmer too. I says, but because of your height and all that, you have a responsibility to protect those who are below you. Get between and protect them. I said, that's what I did. I learned a little later in life, a little bit during high school I learned it. Because I had there's five boys and one girl, so my brothers were all athletic, and we were raised in a government housing project, so we had a little gang, And when we put the word out, they said back off on somebody. They backed off on them, and that's what they were picking on this one kid that really never had a shot in life. He was always picked on, so I protected him as best, and he was protected. And then he was engaged. I mean, this is the way life works sometimes. He was engaged and working for the town, and one of the officers tried to play a joke on him and pinched him between the car and the table, the workbench. It actually crushed his spine. He was crippled, wound up in a home for a number of years, and then finally passed away.
Sad.
It is. It's but you've heard of people like that, and you say, geez, Lord, where is that? Now, the only justification that I heard is that all the pain that we suffer on this earth, so long as we do it in faith, would be used for the term of purgatory for purification, And I said, wow, that's a good hope. That's a good consolation, If you read...
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say...
Jesus is our hope. That's what I was going to say. Jesus is our hope.
Yeah, and if you read Life After Death of the many stories that occurred, I remember this one guy. He was something happened to him. It was a Friday night. It was late, and they said, "No, we can't do anything with him. Throw him in the freezer." So he stood in the freezer. He was in the freezer for the whole weekend, and they went to embalm him on a Monday, and they saw his eye twinkle. Next thing you know, he's up and awake. And it scared the heck out of him. Yeah. First of all, he survived the freezer for the whole weekend. He didn't eat for the whole weekend. Not only that, I met the guy. At my father's house in Mooders, Connecticut. And he says, not only that, but I told him what each of them did for the whole weekend. Now, if that doesn't blow you away, he says, oh, yeah. He says, I told them exactly what they did for the whole weekend because he could see them. And it was all things that he saw. I mean, think of that. And he says, I was given this to come back and tell you this story because there is life after death. And there is.
There is. In fact, on my YouTube,
Jesus is the door.
He is. And on my YouTube, all these atheists keep telling me, God's a big fairy in the sky. God is, just your made-up friend. There's no life after death. You guys just need that as a crutch, but that and that sort of thing. And, a lot of more atheists will just leave these little sassy comments and be like, God's a fairy in the sky, a made-up friend. Enjoy your life, Christians. There's nothing in the end. And they basically say that, Christianity and all religions are just silly. And I always respond by saying, not remotely as silly as atheism, which believes that we came about by nothing, from nothing, because of nothing, and for no reason whatsoever, it just happened. Or, worse, everything was there for eternity, no explanation. It's like that's more silly to me than an actual living, breathing, in a sense, God who's eternal, pure existence, pure actuality. That makes much more sense.
Well, I say this, it's like the gamblers, I said to people when they mention that to me, I said, you know what? Let's. I look at it this way, my friend. If I am wrong, what did I lose? I lost my life on earth. But if I'm right, what did you lose? All eternity. And I always get a response to total silence.
That's right.
Because that's true.
I always add on to that, right? Nobody will know because we're all going to rot in the grave and not a single person will know who's right because we won't have any consciousness. But if we're right, everyone's going to know that you were wrong, and you're going to know once you hit Judgment Day, and billions of people are going to see the decision you made. There's a big difference. And I'm willing to gamble. Go ahead.
The whole thing, yeah. I mean, how many miracles have you seen in your life? And people they see those also. Maybe not as many as we do because we search it out. But when we see it, I don't forget it.
Right.
So I know there's a God. The evidence is all around us if you go search it out. I mean, that's why we're here.
Well, exactly, and in fact, that's what Romans, the book of Romans in the Bible, chapter 1 says. That's exactly what it says. Like, for example, it says, sorry. It basically says what you were saying, but it says that you can see God's fingerprints on creation. You can see Him in everything that He created, and everything points to Him. It says in Romans 1:20, ever since the creation of the world, the invisible nature, namely His eternal power and divinity, has been clearly perceived in all the things that He has made. So these heathens are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks to Him, but rather they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. They claimed to be wise, but they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images representing man, birds, animals, and reptiles, and therefore God gave them up to the lusts of their heart and their impurities and their bodies. For they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever and ever. Amen.
Amen is right. And that's another thing too. God is very, I had a friend of mine who says, God is a loving God and stuff like that. It says, don't think so. Don't think that you're not going to be held accountable for what you did or what you're doing. He's a just God. That doesn't mean He's going to forgive everything you did. He's a just God. It's up to you to turn to Him. It's up to you to change your ways.
Right.
What did He say to the prostitute?
Go and sin no more.
Sin. Yes, sin no more. What does that tell you? It's the message that we give to all the listeners too. You heard for Bryan and I for me over a year, and for Bryan for several months. And I thank you, Bryan, for being part of this whole broadcast.
I'm happy to.
We're leaving the door open in the future once we get past this the workload that we currently have. And it's sad for me to call this the last show, but at the same token, I know that whatever God wants us to do, He's going to have us do it, and I just hope we're open to it.
That's right.
But, Bryan, I'd like you to give a little more information on your website again to reiterate that.
Sure. If anybody needs a professional Catholic speaker here in Connecticut, in Hawaii, or in Ireland, or anywhere in between, you can check out my website at CatholicBryan.org, or YAN, and my handle, so to speak, is Catholic Bryan because I'm Catholic and I'm Bryan, and I tried to make it easy to remember. So if you want to look me up on YouTube, it's Catholic Bryan. If you want to look me up on social media, it's Catholic Bryan. And if you want to get my website, it's www.catholicbryan.org. And if you want to check out my book, it's called Why Do You Believe in God? And it can be found on Amazon, or it can be found on my website.
Amen.
Amen.
I'll give you the honors of a closing prayer. I just want to say peace to everybody. Thank you for listening. I'm sure we're going to hear you. We'll be on again sometime.
And I also want to thank the listeners too.
Yes.
I just want to thank them, and for people who tuned in, I really hope that you were inspired by these shows. I hope that you learned a lot about your Catholic faith from these shows, and I hope that it's inspired you to live your faith even more and to become a saint. So with that being said, Tony and I want to invoke Almighty God, eternal, and we want to ask you, Father, in the name of Jesus Christ, your Son, to watch over us, protect us, and send your blessing down upon us. We want to ask you, God, to anoint us and to bless our ministries, to bless this radio station, to spread it across the United States, Lord, and even the world. And we ask that you bless each and every person who hears our words and the words of all of these shows on this station, that lives may be changed, hearts may be converted, and people may be set free by the gospel of Jesus Christ for his glory and in his name. Amen.
And Bryan, with a great smile, amen. God bless.
God bless you, Tony. God bless everybody.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.